Today, we're talking about how to raise and feed baby fish. This can get super technical, but I also want to keep it super applicable. Most people, dare I say, maybe everyone, starts by breeding fish on accident. And maybe it's a tetra, maybe it's a live bear like it was for me. My first ever was some black mollies that gave birth, and my world exploded into what it is today. And the difference between getting free fish and not is knowing how to raise them, or even looking for them too, or creating an environment. You know, a bare bottom tank is a lot harder to have babies make it than a fully planted tank. First things first, we have to identify if we're going to attempt to make some inhabitable conditions to raise fish up, whether it's purely I want to crank out 1 billion of these, or it'd be nice if that accidentally kind of happens someday down the road in 8 months. Most fish are an egg layer or scatterer, and that means they take their eggs and they're gonna go put them somewhere, or they're just gonna go eggs everywhere. Let's hope some make it. That covers most of the fish. Then you've got like live bearers. They're gonna hold those eggs inside and release live fish. That's a lot easier to raise up because you don't have to protect the eggs, which is nice. And then you also have mouthbrooders. And these are fish that hold the eggs in their mouth until they hatch. Then they just spit them out and they swim around. I would say fly around, but they swim around. In your aquarium, the more stuff you have, live plants, rockwork, sticks, the more the fish have to look around and the obstacles, the better it is the fry are going to be able to hide. And naturally, that creates an environment where if a fish lays 300 eggs a week, then a couple of those might make it. And that would be great. Egg layers, for the most part, they guard their eggs. But once they're free swimming, you know, once those angel fry hatch out, or angel eggs hatch out, those fry are going to be a little wily. Then we need to feed it. That is the problem. So what you can do is you can get yourself a little bit of supplies that will make things a lot easier. Some fry foods, and that's what you call a baby fish, is a fry. You know, depending on like tetras and that kind of stuff, you might have to go really down the rabbit hole and be like, well, I kind of need vinegar eels. Brine shrimp, like today I was hatching out brine shrimp. I don't even have super small babies. It's a good food for everything, but something like this is not what I recommend because this can of eggs is like over $60, right? It doesn't feel like sand. It feels like flour. You can't probably can't even see. It'll stick to your hands, like you can't get it to come off because it's that fine. And these are the eggs that will hatch out if you're to hatch live baby brine. If you have live bearers and mouthbrooders, you can do things like the fry food, which is just a finer food that you could spray in. You could also have flake food, which, by the way, go buy all the flake food. But something like the extreme flakes, what's nice about it, get a little bit of flake and you can really make it into, you know, that super fine dust. Again, like now it's stuck to my fingers. And that'll just sit right on the top of the water there. But then you've got things like discus. The reason why discus are so hard to raise is because they're very small and they want to feed on the slime coat. So imagine it like your dog eating crumbs off your shirt. That's how you raise a baby discus. You just gotta have enough crud on you that they can eat. A couple days later, 2 or 3 days later, then they can start taking the brine shrimp off of you, and that's when they really start growing. Yeah, brine shrimp is a magical thing. That's why I'm back to hatching it out in the fish room, and I thanked Dean personally yesterday. We were hanging out and I go, you don't know how much you've done. You've got me getting the bug to hatch brine shrimp out, and I know that brine shrimp unlocks a whole new fish keeping level. You want to appropriately size the aquarium to what the fish are today. Not, you know, if you've got 800 angels, don't put them in a 55 gallon. You need to put them in like a 5 or a 10 gallon. And the reason being is you need to make sure the fish don't have to swim too far to find food. If you take, you know, this and you go squirt, squirt, in the 55 gallon aquarium and the food is now miles apart, these fish can actually starve to death while looking for food. They can't find it. Smaller little vessels, aquariums, whatever you want to call them, and then progressively you keep stepping them up. But if you're really starting to raise fry, that's where you want to have a tank ready. You kind of already know you're attempting to do it. You've got those foods ready. and you're gonna make a real go of it. But it's that transition, and that's where a lot of people fall down when it comes to raising fish, is they don't know when to start switching foods. They don't know if they have a small enough food. You know, you don't want to go from like, oh, here's a popcorn shrimp or chicken to here's a 30-pound turkey, right? With the brine shrimp, the good thing about them is because they're swimming around all the time, they're very attractive to eat. They almost swim into the mouth, so that helps. But eventually you get to a tipping point where something like a brine shrimp is not enough anymore. Like, they'll eat it, but they're not growing. And that's where you're gonna have to step it up to mostly frozen and dry foods of normal caliber, but get like micro pellets, like the nano pellet from Extreme, or Hikari's got the micro pellet or the fancy guppy pellet. Both those are very good for raising fish as well. What we recommend, or I recommend, is the day they hatch, maybe I don't feed, but every other day after that I do feed, and realize some at the very beginning of day 1 probably are ready to eat. Most are ready to eat day 2, and some won't have started eating till day 3 because they're just slow to hatch and that kind of stuff. So there's a variance there, and the same thing's going to happen when you start transitioning foods. Let's say you've been feeding for 2 weeks live baby brine. When you start going over to, like, let's try some fry food from Aquariumcoop, or some flake food crunched up, or whatever it's going to be, realize that maybe half of them will start eating that, but tomorrow maybe 60%, and the next day 70%. But if you just go, oh, they ate it, and tomorrow you don't do any live baby brine, you just do that, you'll probably starve off 40-50% of your fish without knowing it until it's too late. So it's always a gradual thing, and I would feed both of them over and over and over until you just feed less and less of the brine, if that's what you want to do. It's still great at growing fish. I hatch it out for my entire fish room, and then I feed every tank pretty much. Expect some die-off. Now, some of that could be genetics. Some of it could be the way we're keeping fish. Like, if you've only ever raised angels once, you're probably going to kill some. It could be they're very young, right? They didn't get fully fertilized and that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of reasons why you might not get all of them to hatch. And don't feel like you failed. The goal is just to improve on that. So if you had 800 eggs and you raised 100, now they're adults, that's still 100 more than someone who hasn't raised them. But maybe on the next batch you're trying to do 120. Like, oh, where do I think I lost some? One of the steps that people really lose them is when you get fish that outgrow each other. So maybe this fish is getting the lion's share of food, and tomorrow when I feed, it's going to get the lion's share again. And the next day when I feed, it's going to get the lion's share again. And so now it's 5 times as big as the other one that wasn't getting as much. If I leave them in the same aquarium, that's always going to happen. And eventually it could get so big it'll eat that fish or make it starve. So a lot of breeders, what they'll do is they'll go in like once a week and remove all the biggest fish and put them in the next size up aquarium. And eventually you're left with this very small group of runts that you can kind of catch up and get them. And meanwhile, you might have to start that on the next tank, right? Depending on how big these fish are going to end up overall, you can have to do that 2 or 3 times.
We hope you enjoyed this video. We actually picked another one that we thought you might like, so click on it right here.